Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. This is the Monday edition of Focal Point. You are on board the USS Focal Point, our patrol boat in which we patrol the choppy waters of America's public life, looking relentlessly for the coordinates where truth intersects with politics. Talking about this judge, and I want to shift gears here and talk about this Colorado school shooting, but I just want to close the loop on our conversation about this polygamy ruling. You know, I stressed with you the point that it is simply impossible for polygamy to be constitutionally permissible. It is flatly impossible, historically impossible, because polygamy was a capital crime everywhere in the United States at the time the Constitution was enacted. Now, I went back and looked at the 1879 ruling from the Supreme Court on polygamy. Remember, it was practiced in Utah because it was a doctrine of the LDS Church. They tried to claim religious liberty. We have the right to the free exercise of religion, and the Supreme Court says, no, you don't. Not when what your religion teaches you is something that is subversive of good order. That was the limit that the Supreme Court in 1879 drew. We're not going to allow polygamy because it is a violation of social duties and it is subversive of good order. That's a direct quote from the Supreme Court, 1879. Now, this is... Again, these are excerpts right from the Supreme Court ruling. Polygamy has always been odious among the northern and western nations of Europe. And you remember, Utah had to officially renounce polygamy in order to become a state in the Union. And every state that came into the Union after that. In Idaho's Constitution, first page of the Constitution, there is a renunciation of bigamy and polygamy. Right there, freedom of religion shall not be construed to permit bigamy or polygamy. It's right in the Idaho State Constitution, 1890. Utah came into the state in 1896, and the Utah Territory, they had to give up, they had to renounce polygamy in order to become a part of the United States of America. And they challenged the ruling against polygamy, and here's what the Supreme Court said: no, polygamy has always been odious among the northern and western nations of Europe. Notice, always. So what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, is something of historic and seismic proportions. Here is something that, according to the Supreme Court of 1879, had always been odious. That means noxious. That means an abomination among the northern and western nations of Europe, always, in all of their history, until the establishment of the Mormon Church, and was almost exclusively, the court says, a feature of the life of Asiatic and of African people. Then they go on to talk about the United States. By the statute of James I, the offense, if committed in England or Wales, this is the King James of the King James Bibles, back to about 1600 or so, this offense, if committed in England or Wales, was made punishable in the civil courts, and the penalty was death. As this statute was limited in its operation to England and Wales, it was at a very early period reenacted, generally with some modifications, in all the colonies. Now listen to this. This is where the Supreme Court makes exactly the point that I made. In connection with the case we are now considering, it is significant, a significant fact that on the 8th of December, 1788, after the passage of the Act establishing religious freedom, and after the Convention of Virginia had recommended as an amendment to the Constitution of the United States the declaration in a Bill of Rights that, quote, all men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, end quote, the legislature of that state substantially enacted the statute of James I, death penalty included. They go on. There never has been a time in any state of the Union when polygamy has not been an offense against society, cognizable by the civil courts and punishable with more or less severity. In face of all this evidence, it is impossible, the Supreme Court, it is impossible to believe that the constitutional guarantee of religious freedom was intended to prohibit legislation in respect to this most important feature of social life. Upon marriage, society may be said to be built, and out of its fruits spring social relations and social obligations and duties with which the government is necessarily required to deal. So in other words, this is a rogue judge, and there is no constitutional warrant whatsoever, absolutely none, zilch, nada, zip, no constitutional claim on the right to polygamy, this judge notwithstanding. Now, I want to turn our attention. Number to call, by the way, we'll start taking some phone calls here in a little bit, 888-589-88 8840 is the number to call, 888-589-8840. Now, you heard about this shooting at this school in Colorado. And, Jeff, let's grab clip number 1 and have it ready to go. There was this 18-year-old student. Apparently, he'd been kicked off the debate team and went to the school. He was armed with a shotgun. He had a bandolier full of ammunition. He had a machete. He had 3 explosives in his backpack. In other words, he was intending some serious mayhem when he got to the school that day. And he was stopped by an armed guard. Again, it's a reminder that the only solution to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It's only when he knew that an armed officer was about to confront him that he took his own life. Now, sadly, he fired at point-blank range into the head of a fellow student. Didn't know her. There's no indication they knew each other. She just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he shot her with his shotgun at point-blank range. Now, you're going to hear a lot of calls that we got to have more strict gun control laws. This just proves we got to have gun control laws. Well, there is a strict gun control law in Colorado that requires background checks, and this guy had purchased that gun legally on December 6th, which means background checks had been done on him. This Senate bill that requires universal background checks, they're saying this is the panacea, this is the cure, this will solve the problem. It would not have stopped this guy. He passed whatever those background checks were. Now, I remember reading the early media accounts of this shooting, and the media could not stop talking about the fact that this guy came from a religious family and attended Bible studies. Now, you had to go deep into the article to find out, number one, his parents divorced in 2011. Now, I'm not going to blame what this guy did on the divorce because he's accountable for what he did. I mean, he has nobody to blame. He's the one that went into the school. He's the one that grabbed the machete. He's the one that put the bandolier of ammunition around his chest. He's the one that took the shotgun. He's the one that took the explosive into the school. He's the one that fired at point-blank range. So I'm not letting him off the hook for any little bit of this. But I am telling you, ladies and gentlemen, we just have got to come to understand as a culture the enormous devastation that divorce wreaks on teenagers. I mean, there is never a time, trust me, and I speak from experience on this, there is never a time when a child is old enough to deal with the pain of his parents' divorce. Never. And so it just has a tragic, devastating, shattering effect on children. They're never, and you can talk about the resilience of children all you want, but it just devastates them. And I'm not passing judgment on anybody that's gone through this, been forced to do it. I mean, there may be times when, Jesus, obviously there were times when divorce was justified, even according to the Lord, when the marital bond of one flesh union was broken. That was a basis on which Jesus allowed for divorce. So it's not to say divorce is never justified. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying when children are involved, regardless of where the fault lies, it's devastating for children. Now, so we don't know what happened after the divorce, but the indication is that probably blew up that whole Bible study going to church business right there and plunged this kid into kind of a tailspin. Now, the other thing that the media did not want you to know about this guy is whatever he might have been, whatever kind of home life he might have had, he was a socialist. He was a communist, and that's what the media did not want you to know. In fact, I've got a story here from the Denver Post. When they first reported on the story, they said that he was a committed socialist. That's the original version of the story, said he was a committed socialist. Then they changed it subsequently to say he was politically opinionated. In other words, they completely removed from the story any mention of what exactly his political beliefs were. So realize the impression the media was trying to create. He comes from a religious family. They go to Bible study, and he was very opinionated politically. That's all the information you would get from the edited version of the Denver Post story. So you would naturally draw the inference that, well, he was a Tea Partier. His parents were Tea Partiers, and he was just an out-of-control Tea Party. That would be the impression that you would get. Now, listen to this clip number 1. This is a student who knew him, had him for classes, and here's how he described the shooter at Arapahoe High School.
He was friendly enough, very proud of being a socialist. He was very outspoken on his political views. To him, it just meant more economic equality.
So he was very proud of being a socialist. He was very outspoken on his political views. He had a Facebook post which was specifically anti-Republican. He was against the Republican Party. He was specifically against gun rights. He was against capitalism. He was for women's rights, which just is an expression referring to abortion. So this guy was as far away from being a conservative right-winger as you could possibly get. But the media immediately wanted to tag him as a right-wing nut job. Now, I just want to remind you of some of the shootings in the past and the knee-jerk tendency of the media to try to tag these shooters as right-wingers and how they've been wrong every single time. Back in 2009, remember that census taker that was hanged in rural Kentucky? They thought it was the Tea Party killing him because he represented the government. Well, it turns out it was suicide, killed himself. Remember that guy that flew the plane into the IRS building? Everybody said, oh, that's the anti-tax Tea Party. Well, it turns out he quoted from the Communist Manifesto. February of 2010, Amy Bishop shoots colleagues at the University of Alabama. Everybody said the gun-loving Tea Party was responsible. Turns out she was an Obama voter. March of 2010, John Patrick Bedell shot 2 Pentagon security. The media said a right-wing extremist. Nope, a registered Democrat and a 9/11 truther. May of 2010, Times Square bomb. Remember, while kids were watching The Lion King. Bloomberg's out there saying somebody doesn't like health care. Well, it was a Muslim jihadist. August of 2010, during the Ground Zero mosque debate, a Muslim cabbie was stabbed in New York. Media says a right-wing nut job. Nope, it was a lefty student off his meds. And then you got the guy that shot up the campaign event of Gabby Giffords. Every one of them leaning left in their political views.
You want a glass of water. What do you do?